Chapter 4, Bolton. Summary. The girl who'd almost fainted at speaking to Tommen was decidedly more vicious when faced with true danger in the form of an army. "You stand here, Lord Baelish, accused of the following crimes." Sansa felt her hands clenched together in her lap. She wore gloves, however, and amidst the heavy northern furs around her shoulders, nobody would be able to see the tension thrumming inside her. Jon stood behind her, and his presence steadied her as much as it made something low in her belly twist with heat. Focus. The murder of Jon, Lord of the House Arryn, of the murder of 7 knights paramount of the Vale, and the murder of a girl in your employ who visited Winterfell. You are further accused of hiring Vale mercenaries and sending them outside your own territory, which is a crime as stated by the laws laid down by Robert Baratheon. Her father straightened. "How do you plead?" Peter looked over them. He was slightly disheveled from his imprisonment, but only very superficially. Sansa looked closer and thought that he was trembling. "Not guilty," he said. Sansa let her spine straighten minutely, and then checked herself. It wouldn't do to look too eager. But father only nodded to the scribe, likely ensuring that this bit was being written down, and then called up a number of the hastily knighted men that Peter had brought with him from the Vale. "We shall start with the charge of murder of the girl," he said. "Sir Godric, please stand and tell us what you saw when you were in the neck." The knight was very pale, Sansa thought, and very young. His hair was dark and fashionably cut, and likely he hadn't ever thought about anything other than being a knight with as much acclaim and fame as Loras Tyrell. Had she been younger, she might have swooned over him. Now she only felt pity. His story was stumbling, unrehearsed. Sansa heard about quiet knives and the color of blood on snow and the choking, quiet cries of a woman whose only crime was looking somewhat like a Stark. Her hands trembled, and even she didn't know whether it was out of outrage or fear. Then she felt Jon's hand creep from his grip on the back of her chair, upwards until his fingers curled over the very tips of her shoulders. Sansa fancied that she could feel the warmth through even her furs. It forced the chill sinking into her bones to retreat, at least. When his story was finished, the other northern lords had the opportunity to ask questions. That was how things worked in the north. When they were convicting lords, Sansa remembered faintly from the time the northern lords had converged on Bear Island for Jorah Mormont's trial. Each lord asked one question to each witness, and declared their allegiance to the person on trial with either a simple or a difficult question. Littlefinger could speak at the last, not question any of the witnesses, but give his own view of the events. Sansa kept herself still through a force of will as the questioning of each Vale Knight continued. It was a tedious process, taking almost the entire afternoon. "That serves as evidence for the murders of the Vale Knights Paramount and an unnamed girl," her father said. "Now, we shall present the evidence for the death of Jon Arryn, Lord of the Vale and Lord of House Arryn." At that, Sansa rose to her feet. Jon's hands fell away from it, and she felt the loss of pressure closely. But then she was passing her father, and he nodded to her with such steady confidence that she felt a smile curl over the edges of her lips. Chin up. "My lords," she said in greeting. Some of them nodded in response, others looked irritated to have Sansa speaking too young, some thought, or too female. Sansa raised her chin as proudly as she could. If they underestimated her, it could only help. "When Lord Baelish entered Winterfell, it was I who told Stark men to arrest him," she started, and then paused, letting her eyes meet each of theirs. Only then did she continue. "When I was in the South, when I was a prisoner of the Lannisters, I heard many things, many secrets. Most I ignored, but even the most ridiculous lies have some source of truth in them. One of these had to do with Lord Baelish." "What happened to your hair?" Peter asked suddenly, sharply. "North, dark or tully red?" One of the guards shifted, and the scrape of his spear against the ground was enough to make Peter's jaw close automatically. "You don't ask questions right now," he said sharply. Sansa kept her back to him, ignoring him as expertly as she could. I heard that he killed Jon Arryn, she said softly. I thought it rumor at first, but then he married Lady Lisa, and when he came here claiming what he did, I had to verify it. And so I sent a letter to Lady Lisa pretending to be her husband, and asked her which poison she used under his behest. An innocent woman would have asked which poison, of course. She tilted her head. The raven she sent back not only gave the name of the poison, but also the bottle itself. She held up a small red-rimmed glass bottle and placed it on the table, just far enough from Peter that he couldn't reach it, just close enough that he could identify it clearly. Tears of Lys, she said clearly. The lords straightened in their seats, frowning. Sansa felt a flare of deep, warm relief inside her chest as she swept a curtsy. Then she nodded and turned to head back to her seat, passing her father on the way there. He didn't smile, but he did incline his head almost respectfully, and that was enough to keep her head held high. That is the evidence for the murder of Jon Arryn, her father said. Last, we have the evidence for the mercenaries. Robb stood as soon as he was finished. Sansa had been steady and formal. She presented evidence, coldly, calmly. But she didn't know these lords. She hadn't spent a year speaking or yelling at them. Robb had. I am different from you, she had told him. Stand tall, Robb, and use the tools that they've given you. I understand that there have been several complaints of mercenaries south of White Harbor, he began. They were numerous enough for Lord Manderley to ask for an extra contingent of troops. Shocking, Sansa thought dryly. The Manderleys were known for being proud and staunch lords, rarely asking even the Starks for help. For Lord Manderley to have actually asked for more troops, the problem must have been truly troubling. Which every last lord here knew. These riders were captured and questioned a few weeks previously by Lord Manderley, Robb continued. Though they personally did not know who had hired them, they gave the name of a low lord in the Vale who handled the vast majority of their finances. After some cajoling, the Vale lord gave the name of the man who had given him the gold to pay for the mercenaries. He turned, arms spread wide like a bird's outstretched wings. The paper in his hands, one of so many that would damn Peter to the deepest hell, fluttered like so many feathers. You have learned to be dramatic, Sansa thought, and it was 2 parts proud, 3 parts sad, and another part that was altogether too sharp-edged for her to name anything but shame. He named Peter Baelish, recently married into the House Arryn, Robb said, and there was nothing of triumph in his voice. He sent paper correspondence between himself and Lord Baelish, some of them dated before even his marriage. The letters contain instructions to take money from the Iron Throne and hire sellswords riding through Vale. The letters contain instructions to send these sellswords to the north. The letters, my lords, the letters contain instructions to find a lean man with dark hair and gray eyes, whose leg is injured, and a girl with the same north dark hair. He paused. Even Sansa, who knew the truth, who had pledged everything to unseating Peter already, felt breathless, felt caught up in the web of rage and lies that Robb was spinning so effectively. Robb turned, and his eyes caught Sansa's for half a heartbeat before he lifted his chin and faced the lords coldly. The letters said to kill them, he finished. There was silence for scarcely a moment before Lord Umber began shouting. And then the others were standing, raging, reaching for swords to strike the traitor's head from his shoulders. Sansa glanced at Peter and saw that he looked paler than ever before, the line of his throat taut and stiff. You tried to kill me, she thought, and it was bitter, it was vindictive, it was hateful. How does it feel to be on the other end of the sword? Jon bent his head over her chair when the roars reached a fever pitch and whispered in her ear, You were wonderful. Not over yet, she murmured back, and knocked her head forward just slightly, so the side of her scalp slid over his cheek as he pulled away. Jon felt the cool silk of Sansa's hair slip across his cheekbone, and he would have shivered had he not been in front of so many people. He had never seen someone so lovely as when she had stood in front of all these powerful men, This girl who hated the feeling of steel but learned to swing a sword. This girl who had fear living in her bones and a courage that ran even deeper. This girl who was born to be a ruler, born to be queen. "'Tis time for Lord Baelish to defend himself," a guard called out, voice rough and just loud enough to be heard over the rage of the lords. Baelish rose to his feet unsteadily. Jon might have believed it had he not immediately regained his balance. If he was trying to gain the sympathy of the lords, however, it was to be a futile attempt. There was nothing of kindness in any of their eyes as they watched him, eagle-eyed. "I pledged myself not guilty," he said. "I stand by it. My lords, I know not what these knights claim. Perhaps they think that if the position of Lord Arryn is open once again, they can lay claim to it. They are young, my lords, and they are foolish. Who trusts a child's eyes on their first hunt? Who trusts the motivations and greed of sellswords?" His shoulder lifted half gracefully. "And of course, wherever I came from, I am now Lord Arryn. My lady wife would be most displeased to see my head. And how many kingdoms can the North make enemies of?" "The Westerlands, the Crownlands, if the Vale joins them." Lady Catelyn stood then, and she stood tall. She stood proud. "None," she announced. "Upon hearing Lady Arryn's confession, we sent ravens to those lords who hadn't agreed to bend the knee to Lord Baelish. Lord Bronn's Yohn Royce agreed, after further negotiations, to keep the Vale's neutrality if and when Lord Baelish's head was sent to the Eyrie. Baelish went white. He stared up at Lady Catelyn, and the betrayal Stark on his face ached as much as it made something animal in Jon's chest crow. Then, moods abruptly switching from shock to rage, he snarled, "She is your sister." "She is," Lady Catelyn acknowledged. "And as we speak, she yet keeps her head. She is my family, Peter, and so I will protect her. But she killed her husband. What honor, what duty is in that?" She shook her head sadly. "She is to be stripped of her title of Lady Arryn. Lord Royce's men are escorting her to Riverrun, and her son, Robert Arryn, shall be fostered at Runestone until he comes of age. And so the Vale shall be glad to take Lord Baelish's head." Baelish's fists clenched. "Does our childhood mean nothing to you?" "It meant everything to me," she said sadly. "But then you sent a raven telling me that you would protect my husband, my daughter, and you instead tried to kill them. Did you think I would have any love for you after that?" She was shaking, Jon realized suddenly. She was shaking, and though no tears ran down her cheeks, there was a grief as vast as the wall on her face. "You loved him," he thought. "You loved him, and he betrayed you, and you cannot even weep now." It was sad, but if the story ended right there, Jon would never mourn it. Not when he knew what Baelish went on to do. Not when he knew that this man was capable of throwing entire kingdoms into chaos simply for vengeance, for greed. But that did not mean he did not pity Lady Stark. It ached to have to choose, he thought, no matter how easy that choice was. After a moment, she turned and left the room. Arya followed her out, sending a sharp glare over her shoulder, and the anger in the room ratcheted higher. Lord Baelish? His father? No, not his father, not according to Sansa, and that ached every time he thought it. Asked, "Do you have anything more to say before we determine your fate?" "Yes," he hissed, looking crazed beyond all control, looking so angry and wild that Jon almost placed his hand on his sword. And then Baelish turned to Sansa, and when the rage shifted into an ill-fitting mask of sly contempt, Jon actually did straighten, resting a hand on the pommel of his sword. "So the lords of the North take their cues from a Southron girl as changeable as the color of her hair," he snarled. "A girl who could hardly speak in front of the Lannisters. A girl who bargained for her father's life and won it," Sansa interrupted, steely. She rose to her feet, and Jon felt the force of her fury, quiet and as surprising as an autumn storm. "I am the eldest daughter of Lord Eddard Stark," she said, and it rang in the room as only truth could. "I am the daughter of Lady Catelyn Stark. I am the daughter of the North," and whatever accusations you have against me, Lord Baelish shall have to be spoken to be addressed. We Northerners do not jump at shadows." "No? You arrested me in the name of House Stark." He grinned, triumphant, teeth a cut of bone across his sharp face. "Answer this, then, Lady Sansa. What man can commit treason to a house not of royal blood? How can I commit treason against House Stark, when House Stark holds no crown? Which king ought we await?" Sansa shot back. "Joffrey Lannister, the product of an incestuous union between Cersei Lannister and her brother? Stannis Baratheon, who is besieged at his own home by his younger brother? There is no royal family, Lord Baelish. There is no longer an heir to the Iron Throne." There was a long silence when Sansa had finished speaking. Jon could see the way her hands clenched in her skirts, the leather of her gloves crinkling angrily. She was tensed, every muscle in her back tensed. Treason. The lords were angry, they wanted blood, but treason was another crime altogether. Where was the honor in it? And then Robb rose to his feet. He stepped behind Sansa, hands resting on her shoulders, before he moved to bracket her side. Jon saw a vision he'd seen only once before in all his years, the very first time in the Godswood, throat still aching with bruises, and Robb's words, "We are Starks, and we do not turn our faces." It turned Sansa's face harder, wolf-like and sharp. It made all Robb's laughter fade into a look as flat and cold as a snowstorm. "We are Starks, and we are wolves. We bent the knee to the Targaryens only when Aegon the Conqueror brought 3 dragons with him," Robb said fiercely. "But where are the dragons now? Where are the Targaryens now?" "Dead," the room hissed. It seized with it, the black rage twist of treason, a storm of lightning and swords rising with each breath exhaled, with each understanding, sympathetic brow lightening. Lord Glover suddenly pounded the table with a mailed fist. "The Targaryens are gone," he shouted, "and we yet remain." "Aye," Lord Umber said, and unsheathed his sword. Jon almost started forward, almost unsheathed his own, but neither Sansa nor Robb so much as flinched, so he waited. "What knowledge do those southern lords have of us in the north? There is only one house that knows the chill of winter, my lords. There is only one man who knows each of us. There sits the only king I mean to bend my knee to." The point of his sword swung past Robb and aimed directly at Ned Stark. Ned looked stunned and then shook his head. "No," he replied firmly. "I am honored, my lords. But if the North is to keep a king, it shall need one that can ride, one that can fight, and I cannot." His eyes fell on Robb. "But there is one that you can call king," he said softly. "A man who is strong and proud and intelligent. A man who is brave and gentle, who will see to both the small folk and the lords." "I cannot be your king, Lord Umber, but Robb can." "An untested boy?" Lord Glover demanded. "A green boy." "A Stark," Sansa snapped. "A Stark who has ruled the North for a full year on his own. A Stark who wields a sword better than most any of you, despite being half your age." Her chin was raised, her jaw clenched, her braided hair hanging down to the small of her back like a bloodied sword. "Tell me when you took the mantle of your lordship, Lord Glover? Was it 15? Younger? What place do you have in protesting this placement?" Baelish's eyes glittered, startled. "You saw her dark hair and pale skin in fear, and not the wolf within." Jon didn't grin, but his teeth felt sharp against his tongue. "The true tragedy here is that you will not be able to tell the Lannisters who Sansa truly is." Robb breathed in and then stepped forward, pressing Sansa backwards. "Winterfell needs a lord and the North needs a warden," said Robb, "but we are also in need of vengeance. Jory Castle and 20 guardsmen, 20 good, honorable guardsmen, were killed for the Lannisters' fears. Their families sit in this hall, baying for blood, for vengeance, and I know only one thing to say: those who have hurt us will bleed. For every Stark man killed, we shall take 10 of theirs." He nodded to Lord Umber's still, unsheathed sword. Call your banners, my lords, and we shall ride south. We shall raise the Westerlands to the ground and give the Lannisters a taste of northern justice." Lord Umber's face twisted. Slowly he knelt. "By your blood, by your father's blood, I swear my sword and my men's swords," he announced. "The king in the north." Then the others were raising their swords and shouting, and Jon felt as if the skies themselves had bled open, sending down these roars, these men. The old gods, perhaps. All he knew was that there was a storm that night in the great hall of Winterfell, and it tasted like lightning and ice. That night, Sansa slipped into the dungeons. Peter had been escorted from his relatively comfortable room in the keep to the dungeons after the lords declared Robb king. Sansa had watched, and she had felt a fear thrum against the back of her throat like a harp's strings. How could she protect him when he pledged himself to the North vengeance? But she would. Sansa would do what she had to do, as she always had. In the night, when the shadows curled like black fingers over Winterfell's stone walls, Sansa would allow herself to be selfish as well. Jon was with Arya, sparring in an attempt to relax. Robb and their father were going over the details of his kingship. Their mother, Bran, and Rickon were in her chambers, trying to comfort her. She was still infuriated over Peter's duplicity, still mourning over his betrayal. Sansa had refused supper in favor of spending time with her. But after Bran and Rickon tumbled into the room, she left and headed down to the dungeons. There were 2 guards at Peter's door. Sansa threw back her hood and stepped into the lamplight. "I wish to speak to him," she said. They exchanged wary looks. It made her heart tighten, made blood rush in her ears. "Open the doors," she told them flatly. "If you've something to take up, ask my brother. Or my father if it bothers you that much. But before then, you shall open these doors." One slightly taller, a little older, finally sighed and reached for the handle. "If you wish us to enter," he said seriously, dark eyes sharp in his face, "then all you must do is scream. We shall hear you, my lady." Sansa thought of the knife in her shoe, the way Peter's hands were thin and chapped from the wind, the cold promise she would give him. "Tonight, I am no lady. I am a wolf." Peter would see what he hadn't, and she knew that this room would be where she killed him, at the last. There would be no need to take his head if she stripped him of everything he prided himself on first. "Of course," she said serenely, and entered the cell. It was damp, and cold, and dark. There was a single grate set high in the wall, but it let in only a faint sliver of moonlight. The only way she could see anything of Peter was through the candles she herself brought with her. "So the little dove decides to visit at the last," Peter croaked. When he shifted to better see her, chains clanked. "Tell me, how does it feel to be surrounded by northern savages once more?" "Tell me how it feels to be in chains," Sansa replied calmly. "Tell me how it feels to know that your plots have been uncovered, and that over 15 years of planning and conniving have been rendered useless by a girl younger than that. Tell me how it felt to be under all those judgmental eyes in a hostile court, Lord Baelish, and then I shall answer your question. Where were these teeth in King's Landing? Cersei Lannister would have killed me if she thought I was any kind of a threat." She shrugged. "I am a survivor first. I simply didn't show my weapons." Peter watched her carefully. Suddenly, slowly he said, "Everyone wondered who told your sister and bastard brother to flee. I told the Queen that it was you, but nobody believed it, not even me. Not even the Queen, when she accused you." Sansa waited, and he went on, "But who else? No servant would have dared, and what nobleman would have wanted to?" She tilted her head to the side. "I did what I had to do to save those I love." He shook his head as if to let those thoughts fall away. Sansa realized that his hands were trembling very, very finely. "Why are you here?" he asked hoarsely. "Because I wanted you to know that I'm the reason you're going to die tomorrow," she murmured. The girl Cersei Lannister, did not believe I could kill someone." "Aelin Payne?" he whispered, horrified. It was you who killed him." "I will not swing the sword," Sansa told him, ignoring his words with ease. "But I shall ensure that one remembers you." "All memory of you will disappear? Who shall remember a petty lord with ambition enough to rise high? What will they ever say of you, but that you were found and silenced by northern honor, northern steel? You shall be as dust." "They will sing of me and mine for centuries," Sansa told him, and there was something in her voice that made it sound less a promise and more a truth. "The Starks will endure, and all that you are will be forgotten. I want you to know that, Peter Baelish. There shall be no escaping my brother's sword on the morrow." "Look me in the eye," he hissed. "Tell me why I die." Sansa stepped forward, skirts sweeping over dirty stone and dried blood. She knelt, candle throwing deep shadows over them both, and looked at him steadily. "You die because you told my mother that you would protect me," she told him quietly. "You die because you tried to have me killed instead. You die because I cannot see you without wanting to scratch out your eyes. You die because I am a Stark, and I will have my pound of flesh at the end of the day." "I die for your vengeance," Peter said. "Let's not mince words here." Sansa threw her head back and laughed. "You are going to die because you were a fool," she disagreed. "Had you stayed in the Vale, had you stayed in King's Landing even, you'd never have been prosecuted. But you were greedy. You wanted my mother, and for that you paid your price. Or you will." And with that, she stood. She did not feel lighter, Sansa thought, or even happier. But the chill in her chest and the tips of her fingers didn't ache, and her arms felt loose and light against the rough wool of her gown. "You'll never see my mother again," she said. "You will die, and not a single person will think it anything but justice. Not a single soul shall weep over your body." Sansa shook her head. "Was it worth it? Was what worth it?" She arched an eyebrow. "Your obsession with my mother." "She was all I ever wanted," he bit out. "And for that you nearly died 17 years ago." She sighed and stepped away, hand brushing the door handle. "For that you will die tomorrow. I hope for your sake that it was worth something, Lord Baelish, for you've nothing else of worth." "Goodbye," Sansa murmured and stepped outside. The guards let her go without any fuss, and when she went up the stairs, she didn't turn to enter her own room, but rather slipped away into the narrow, rickety flights meant for servants that hadn't been cleaned or looked at in ages. These went higher than the official stairs ever did. Once, Sansa had enjoyed exploring these with Robb before her mother told her it was unladylike. Now she let her feet carry her where instinct guided, past rotted wood and moth-worn tapestries, through a small hole in the wall to a smaller, hidden ledge braced between two towers. The wind cut at her face and hands, and she curled into the warmth of her furs, huddling against the cold stone wall. If she stayed there, nobody would be able to find her. It had been ages since Sansa had ever come here, and now she wondered why that was. Had being a lady been so terribly important for her? But from here, Sansa could see the way moonlight hung over Winterfell. The rough stone walls turned to silver, the hard edges of the earth softened to dark rose. This is mine, she thought. This harsh, frozen land was hers. Robb may have been the king, and her father might have been warden, but Sansa was the only one to know what it felt like to be alone. Sansa was the only one who had not been born to the north, but had chosen it, had embraced it, had let ice flood her veins until the common folk called her the Queen of Winter, though she had no crown but her red hair. "I will never leave this." Peter would have wanted her to. Any husband she took would want her to accompany them to their keeps. Sansa did not know if she could survive that. Jon. She loved him. Her heart fluttered in her chest at the thought, and she wanted to hold him tight enough to bruise, tight enough to know that she would never have to worry about being left alone again. It had taken all the courage in her to tell him she loved him, and the last few weeks, busy as they had been filled with warmth that she could hardly remember from her previous life. I love him. I love him. He would never ask her to leave Winterfell. Sansa breathed in, deep and cutting, the cold air like glass in her lungs, and felt alive. She trusted Jon as she couldn't trust anyone else, and she'd grown around that trust. She knew now. It had become the center of her world. Sansa slept on that ledge that night. When the sky lightened and turned gray, she made her way back to her rooms and washed her face, slipped into a soft woolen gown in stark blue and white, braided the sides of her hair back and let the rest fall free, a banner bright as blood down her back. Then she went to Robb's rooms, and though neither broke the silence, the space between them felt raw and sparking. Once he was ready, they left together arm in arm and stopped in the courtyard. "Chin up," Sansa told him quietly, and stepped back, watching. She owed that much to Peter, at least, even if he'd never have given Sansa that respect. In the end, she thought, this whole thing, Peter's greed, her mother's ignorance, Lisa's jealousy, was just sad. It was painful, and scraped at people's judgment until everything seemed raw and aching, but under it all, it was just plain sad. Peter was brought from the dungeon. As he walked over to the block, Jon slipped beside her. She felt the warmth of his side, though he barely brushed her, and then she couldn't stand it any longer and slid a hand between them, lacing her fingers through his tightly. Robb moved closer to Peter. "For crimes against the North, you are sentenced to die," he announced. "In the name of the North, by the judgment of the Lords of the North, you are sentenced to die. Do you have any last words, Peter Baelish?" "Yes," he said, and turned to meet Sansa's eyes, so cold that Sansa thought she could see his death in them already. "Yes, it was worth it. All of it." The Watchers looked confused, but Sansa didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. And then Robb raised his sword and said, "In the name of House Stark, as the king in the North, I sentence you to death." The sword flashed down, quick and brutal, the shine like a blur of light. Sansa inhaled sharply, but didn't look away. Her hand tightened around Jon's. The blood that stained Winterfell's cobblestones was a red just a shade brighter than Sansa's hair. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still, but then the wind blew, and Robb sagged, and other men started cleaning up the body and the head. Lady, Sansa thought desperately, and in less than a heartbeat her direwolf was there, tall enough for Sansa to lean into, warm enough to lighten some cold, freezing thing in her bones. It was a long moment spent pressing her face into Lady's soft fur, ignoring the rest of the people in the courtyard. Then she straightened, brushed a hand down Lady's back, and turned, catching Jon's arm with her fingertips. "We are Starks," she whispered. "We survive. We endure. Oh gods, tell me I did right, Jon, in killing him." "We are Starks," he whispered back. "We are wolves, Sansa, and we defend our own. You did what you had to do to survive, and if anyone says anything against it, I'll make them regret it." "And how will you do that?" Sansa asked, feeling warmth burst in the back of her throat like a sunburst. "They tell me I'm good with a sword," he drawled, and the arrogance was so uncharacteristic of him that Sansa actually grinned. "I love you," she thought, and then, "I trust you," and Sansa didn't know which one was the dearer to her heart. "The Lannisters pillaged the Riverlands," Catelyn said. In one hand she held a scroll from her brother, begging for aid. The other was braced against a table that represented her son's battle plans. "When do you ride south, Robb?" Her brave, beautiful son looked at her steadily. On his brow was a crown of iron, and all Catelyn could hear was Sansa's prophecy all those years ago, a crown of swords. "We will ride out in a week," he replied. "I want you to accompany us, Mother." "My place is in Winterfell." Catelyn frowned. "Take your father, Robb. What knowledge do I have of war?" "I have 10 advisors who can tell me battle plans," said Robb. "But not a single one of them knows the people of the South. Not a one can offer me information on houses, alliances, or the people. I would have taken Sansa, you know, but, well, she refused." Caitlin smiled, amused despite herself. "Your sister is very smart." She tricked me into this crown, didn't she?" He grinned at her. "But you're the only choice I have, Mother. Someone has to, you know." She looked down at the parchment in her hand and traced the loops of Edmure's signature again. "Help," he'd written. "I need you. We need you." What kind of a person could ignore that? "I'll go," she said, and let relief play across Rob's face for a moment before saying, "But you shall tell your father." The sudden wrinkling of his brow made her laugh. Robb rode south with 20,000 men. He won his first battle and captured Seaguard. He won his second at Oldstones, and at his third, he met Tully's forces and jointly managed to crush the Lannisters at Raventree Hall. The North celebrated their king from White Harbor to Bear Island. In Winterfell, Lord Eddard Stark led cheers for his son that could be heard all the way to Wintertown. Princess Sansa wove banners of pale blue wolves gambling over icy backgrounds, and Princess Arya wielded a sword with as much grace as the young wolf was said to have had when he struck the sword from Tygett Lannister's hands and put him in chains. "To the wolves," the small folk whispered. "May their reign be prosperous." And then news came from Seaguard of a force of Lannisters landing at the Cape of Eagles, only a few miles from the keep, and immediately marching to the Twins. They spent less than a week there, according to the flurry of ravens Robb sent out immediately. Letters from Jenna Fry, née Lannister, assured the Lannister forces a smooth passage. It was particularly infuriating because they had stopped Robb's passage south by more than a fortnight. And though he managed to coordinate with Howland Reed so that the Crannogmen slowed the Lannisters down further, there was still a week between his army and theirs by the time the Lannisters passed the Neck. "Stay in the Riverlands," he told Theon. 7,000 men to take Harrenhal, and 3,000 to hold what we've taken." Theon nodded, and the Great John behind him straightened ferociously, and Robb marched back north with his mother and 10,000 soldiers at his back. On the way there, he burned the Twins down to the ground. The Frey branch was all but ended. The only ones left to them were distant cousins married to other river lords who scarce bore the name. They met them at the White Knife. Manderly river runners and Robb's own forces caught them in a pincer grip, and those that didn't surrender either met Stark blades to their throats or drowned. Robb took the prisoners and all his battle-weary, exhausted men the 60 miles further north to Winterfell. At the cold steel walls he felt his throat tighten. When the gates opened and Bran leapt forward, his hands fierce and tight as he embraced Robb, the tightness swelled and burst. Before he knew it, he was weeping into his brother's neck. And then Arya was there, and then Rickon and Jon and Sansa and their father, and mother, who had been a few hours behind the army, came that night, and it made him wonder how strong Sansa had been to survive losing this and then having it all again, how this kind of love could drive you mad from sheer emotion. "Announce it," Sansa said. Ned looked at her. "How long have you known it?" "Since I was 9. Her back was very straight and her eyes very level. She looked entirely like her mother. "Tell people." "Why now?" "Because Jon insisted that I tell him," she said sharply. "Because he is not your son and it is a lie, and I thought you could not abide that. Because Mother has spent 18 years thinking you loved someone more than you loved her, and this is not fair to her. I don't precisely care what you think my reason is, Father." He inhaled slowly. 9. "You've kept this secret for 6 years. And now?" Sansa worried over Robb incessantly. The only person who could ever make her laugh was Jon. They took such long walks in the Godswood. They moved around each other with perfect ease, always knowing where the other was and where they would move. When they offered advice, it was as if they'd spoken to each other first and only then even bothered to think of speaking it to others. You love him, Ned realized, and not as a brother. Sansa blinked, but her surprise disappeared behind defiance quick enough. And if I do? You love him, he said slowly. And Jon? Does he love you? Her face said the answer she couldn't speak. You love each other, Ned continued. When did this happen, Sansa? Before King's Landing? Before. I don't know, she replied, and though the coloring was all wrong, Ned couldn't help but remember Lyanna in the hours after Rhaegar had crowned her with winter roses, something in the miserable arch of her brow and another thing in her chin, something soft, bright, and sad all at once. I don't know when it happened, Father, but I do love him, and he'll never hurt me, I'll never hurt him, we're happy together. You are a princess. He is the bastard son of my sister. Oh, Sansa, could you not have loved someone else? Please, Sansa said. Tell everyone. Not just for myself, but for everyone as well. Ned almost flinched. I can't. I'll try. You will, she said, and it was iron in a way Ned had never heard from his daughter before. You'll do it, and you'll do it soon. Please, Father. I'd much rather we tell everyone how we feel before someone finds out and accuses us of being Lannisters. To that, he winced. I can understand wanting to avoid that. Good. Sansa turned to the door. I shall see you tonight. Aye, Ned said, and that was that. Ned told Catelyn in the sept. Catelyn heard, and she did not hear, at the same time. For so long she had hated the woman who broke Ned's vows, only to find out that he hadn't, and though the truth was sweeter, the time taken to tell it soured it. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Because at first I didn't trust you, Ned replied, and Catelyn thought she might cry. Her husband, her lovely, kind, honorable fool of a husband, could he not temper his words for once? Could he not offer her a pretty lie for once in his God's forsaken life? And then I didn't wish to even speak of it, to think on it, and... You were selfish, she cut him off. Ned looked startled, but she went on without letting him speak. You didn't want to see my disappointment. You could live without my love, but not without my respect, and so you didn't risk it. He looked at her, so grieved she wanted to claw his face apart. There is a boy there, Catelyn hissed, whom I hated, who I thought represented every last bit of my disgrace. I will lay claim to that bitterness, my lord. I always have, but it is not entirely my own. You are at fault here too for his unhappiness. For so long I blamed myself. What of your guilt? What of the truth owed him? She didn't wait for him to answer. As soon as she finished, she walked away. Another woman might have demanded, what of myself? The lies of almost 2 decades unraveled only now, for reasons I still don't know. What of the betrayal done to me? But Catelyn Tully was a creature of unselfish duty, and that was hewn down to her bones. She could demand justice for the bastard boy she couldn't bring herself to love. She could accuse her husband of tarnishing her honor, but she couldn't bring herself to ask him when he'd decided that she wasn't worth the truth. People said Eddard Stark was an honorable lord. You may try, Catelyn thought, and didn't let the words pass her lips. You may try to be honorable, but you are not. You are only honorable when it suits you, and that is not honor. Catelyn, he began, resting a hand on her shoulder. She ripped away from him. Leave, she ordered, eyes flashing. She had spent years in the north. Let Ned see how it felt to be looked at with icy eyes. Catelyn could be a Stark at last, here in this sept that represented her southern roots. Please, Ned said softly. Leave, she repeated again, and Ned's shoulders slumped. He walked away, slowly, and Catelyn only let herself cry when she was sure he'd left. Ned told his children that night. Robb and Arya went white. Bran was the one to turn to Jon and say quietly, steadily, "You're still our brother." Sansa hadn't left Catelyn's side since she heard her mother crying in the sept. But slowly things came back to an equilibrium. Her mother forgave her father, and though they were still irritable at meals and in private, in public they were perfectly fine. Jon's own forgiveness of their father allowed Arya and Bran and Robb to move past it as well. Sansa spent most of her time hiding in the Godswood or with Jon, trying not to let on everything that she knew. And then, Sansa had known that Robb had been planning something since he arrived at Winterfell. It was there in the ravens sent not to the south, those made sense, but rather to other northern houses. It was there in the stress in his eyes, and the contemplative, frustrated edge when he looked at either her or Arya. Nothing was obvious, but together it formed a picture Sansa wasn't sure she liked. But she was busy, helping her father run Winterfell as she had since her mother and Robb rode south. More than that, she was trying to keep Jon's spirits up, as well as keeping the peace between her parents, not to mention offering some advice to Robb to send to Theon, who was still besieging Harrenhal. Well, the gist was that Sansa was busy, so it took her some time to piece together what was happening. In point of fact, it took her a raven sent from Last Hearth to understand. "You want to send us away?" Sansa snapped, entering Robb's solar in a flurry of skirts and tossed hair. Robb immediately, gratifyingly paled. "Sansa," he started. She was having none of it. She shook the letter in his face. "Why is Morzumber assuring you that he has space in his home for a retinue from Winterfell?" she demanded. "From where exactly do you think he got the idea that Arya and I would be going there?" There was a pause, and Sansa became aware of 3 of Robb's battle commanders, not lords themselves, younger brothers and sons of the lords, looking torn between amusement and discomfort. She straightened, letting a cold mask fall over her features, and turned away to look out the window, an opportunity for Robb to send them away if he wanted to avoid being yelled at in front of others. The men left quickly. As soon as the door snicked closed, Sansa turned and glared at Robb. "Explain." "It's just for a short time," Robb said. "I thought that it would keep you safe." "And sending me away as if I were an unwanted box?" Sansa asked incredulously. "Sending your sisters away to a castle that has nothing around it. The wildlings have been driven back. They haven't been seen for years. I spoke to the great Jon about it." "Oh, lovely," she said mockingly. "I don't have to worry about wildlings at Last Hearth." "Yes, Robb, that's why I didn't want to go there." He arched an eyebrow. "And why is it that you don't want to go?" Sansa spread her arms wide. "Winterfell is my home. Why should I go to a keep that holds no love for me? It's in the north." "If I won't go south, what makes you think I'll go north?" "So you won't leave Winterfell for the rest of your life?" Robb asked disbelievingly. "I don't understand why I have to go now. I don't understand why there. Why now? Why you've suddenly decided that?" "The Lannisters came within 60 miles?" Robb shouted abruptly. 60 miles, Sansa!" Another hard day's ride, and they'd be at Winterfell. They'd be here, at these walls, and there'd not be a single thing I could do to protect you from them. "No force has ever come this far north," Sansa said flatly. "This was a fluke. You underestimate Tywin Lannister." "I don't underestimate him." Robb's fist slammed down on the table, and Sansa felt her jaw click shut with a sudden snap. "Listen to me," he barked. "They came this far. They got this close. I cannot fight a war while I worry about you and Arya, so you will go north, to Last Hearth." "Are you sending Bran?" Sansa asked. "Are you sending Rickon? What a father. Is anyone else supposed to bow their heads to an idiotic decision made simply because you have a savior complex that only applies to me and Arya?" Robb flinched and looked away. Well, you'll take Rickon, he said finally, unwillingly. But Bran will remain here. Will he? Without telling me, Sansa said lowly. Without telling anyone. You expect me to be one of your soldiers, a pretty porcelain pawn to be moved as you wish. Sansa. No, she bit out. Enough. When have I ever tempered my tongue? Tell me, Robb, do you think that if I wanted to ride amongst your men while they fought a battle, you'd be able to stop me? Anger flared in Robb's eyes. I am the king. Because I wanted you to be. Because I pushed you. Pure rage flooded Sansa's chest. When did I bend the knee? She asked coldly. He recoiled. Sansa only tossed the parchment from last hearth onto the table and turned to the door. I'm telling Arya, she announced and left. The next days were a nightmare for Robb. Both Sansa and Arya were furious, and their dire wolves had little compunction in making this known to Grey Wind, who in turn made Robb's life miserable with constant whimpers and pawing. His food was burned, and the edible parts were tasteless. His sheets were still damp on the bed. There was a miraculous shortage of firewood in only his room. The pranks mostly had Arya's vindictive edge to them, but Robb suspected that Sansa was assisting her. There was no way Arya managed to get the sheets to that perfect place between wet and dry that they didn't drip without someone's help. I'm not quite sure who has the crown, he grumbled to Jon on the way to another bloody council from another breakfast filled with freezing looks and contemptuous flicks of hair. I should just put one on their heads. Gods know they'd managed to harangue Tywin Lannister to surrender easily enough. I think Sansa would kill you then, Jon replied, lips twitching, and Robb choked on laughter and burnt bread. And then Sansa told him that she would need the use of the ravens for a full week, all of them, she had said, and the look in her eyes told him not to ask. After that, though Arya was still angry, Sansa didn't appear half as much. Ravens arrived from the Carhold, from Torrhen Square, from White Harbor. Each one left her smiling and brighter faced than before. She's inviting half the bloody North to last hearth, Robb said, looking such a strange mixture of defeated and bewilderedly intrigued that Jon couldn't help but laugh. Surely not that many, he said. Robb shook his head and stabbed a finger at the paper. The Karstarks are sending their only daughter. 2 others from the Manderleys, 3 from the Mormonts, and another from the Tallhearts. More women from the lesser houses than I can count. I'm not japing when I say half the bloody North. Jon shrugged helplessly. Is it supposed to be some sort of revenge for sending her to the Umbers? Robb snorted. I've no clue. And you know what? I do not have space in my head to look at this, to care about this. Tell Sansa that she can invite the rest of the North if she wants. Try to fit all of them into that keeps tiny rooms for as long as needed, and that I don't care. So dramatic, thought Jon. It was what the Starks were, all of them, but Sansa and Robb more than anyone. Red-haired, blue-eyed fools who wept and wailed loud as 100 widows. Silence did not slumber in their bones, and Jon loved every inch of them. I, was all he said though. I'll tell her. The night before Robb and Sansa left Winterfell, they announced Jon's true parentage. Whispers filled the halls. Jon focused on not flinching. When he looked up, Arya had snuck close enough to brush his left side. Bran and Rickon bracketed his other. Robb leaned forward and passed him a flag and a veil. Sansa didn't smile, but her eyes were soft and bright. Jon felt a smile lighten his brow, and then he dug into the meal with gusto. Why are you here? Robb asked, confused. Jon grimaced. I told Sansa what you said. She told me that if I wanted to communicate orders through you so badly, I should go with you to the south. She needs you, Robb exclaimed. You're the one fighting battles, he replied archly. Robb wanted to scream. The only thing stopping him from actually doing so was the 2 guards stationed at the tent's entrance, who'd likely recognized their young king's frustrated, shrill rage. Instead, he breathed deep and clawed some measure of rationality into his tone. "Jon," he said as reasonably as he could, "go back to Sansa." "Robb," Jon said in the same tone, "I'm staying here." "Damn it, I'm the twos. If you say you're the king, I'll take that bloody crown and punch you in the face," Jon said, and there was still no anger in his tone. Damn the man. Robb sighed and turned back, hands gripping the back of the chair until his knuckles were white. "Fine," he snapped, finally, petulantly, and wished his entire family didn't know precisely how to make him feel like a green boy again. Sansa rode north with Arya beside her. The small folk whispered of the red-haired princess who rode a dire wolf silver as weirwood bark and with eyes as gold as Lannister hair. They whispered of the black-haired princess who belted a sword, narrow and gleaming, at her waist. They whispered of the red-curled prince who was as wild as he was cheerful. Women from all the different noble houses descended on Last Hearth. Half arrived before Sansa did, and so when the snow crunched under her feet, 100 eyes were watching her carefully, curiously. In another lifetime, Sansa had barely known the women of the North. She'd had no friends to remember, no people who cared or even spared her a thought when she disappeared. "I am a princess," she thought now. "You will know me. All of you will know who I am, who the Starks are. And you will tell your fathers and brothers and husbands that we are stronger than you can imagine." "Thank you for coming," she said graciously. "There's almost 50 storage rooms under the castle, Princess," said Morzumber. "We've the largest amount of steel in all the North." "That sounds lovely," Alice Karstark said acidly. "And what do you do when it snows?" "Aye," murmured Willa Manderly. "Steel cannot feed women and children." Adara Tallheart lifted one eyebrow elegantly. "Do you say it can feed men, my lady?" "Of course," Mira Reed said. "Haven't you heard of the troubles the kitchens have, trying to make sure steel doesn't cut their throats from the inside?" Sansa would have laughed if Mors wasn't starting to turn puce. There was something to be said, she decided, right then and there, for the rage girls could induce in men. It was a mean, low thought, but a vicious sort of gladness, nonetheless. "My lord," she said instead of a smile, "perhaps you could show us to our rooms." Sansa sent ravens. Her letters weren't sharp any longer, and they were more than a few curt sentences, too. Perhaps, Jon thought, she'd forgiven both of them. He could remember the way her cheeks had flushed, the outrage, and then the cold disdain when she heard his jape. Jon had wanted her to laugh, but Sansa had only turned away, spots of red high in her pale face, and told him, "If you like giving messages so much, you'd be better served in an actual war camp." For a full day, he'd agonized over it. And then she'd come to his rooms that night, a shadow with a wolf dogging her footsteps, and press so close to him that one couldn't pass a single finger between them. "Keep Robb safe," she'd begged him, and Jon had wanted to tell her, "I am sworn to you, Sansa." But Sansa never begged. She never lowered herself to it. And here she was, so worried for her brother that she was begging, and it made something deep and cold in Jon's belly curdle. "Of course," he said instead, carting rough fingers through her hair. "Of course, darling sweet thing. I'll stand beside him. Don't you worry." And so Jon wasn't beside Sansa, and he had to be content with ravens winging forth from the north. She told them of Alice Karstark's pride, of Willa Manderly's pale green hair, of Lyra and Jarell Mormont's ease with swords, of Mira Reed's cheerful disposition and black humor, of Adira Tallheart's grace, of Arya's budding friendship with Lyanna Mormont. Rickon enjoyed the cold air, she said, and Shaggy Dog had taken to the Wolfswood with enthusiasm. Of herself she wrote little, but that which she did spoke of a wry contentment that Jon had never heard before. Perhaps it was doing Sansa well to spend time with women of similar standing and age. When she spoke of her other life, it seemed that she'd never truly had something like it. The men teased him for his hoarding of her letters mercilessly. Jon snapped and snarled and set Ghost on the worst of them, but he did not stop reading over her words before he fell asleep, every night like clockwork. They ran short on meat, and so Morzumber and his brother decided to ride into the Wolf's Wood to hunt. The men seemed so excited to follow them, and every time Sansa passed by the Great Hall, the trip seemed to grow in length. Sansa had known that the men found it chafing, being locked up in a place with only 8 girls of noble status in their households, but she hadn't known their boredom was this bad. By the time they'd fully decided, their trip was to be a fortnight long and offer meat enough to last them a year. Alice rolled her eyes. Adara didn't look up from her sewing, but her lips quirked. Willa and Winifred didn't appear the slightest bit interested in the whole venture. "Of course," Sansa said serenely. "We shall miss you, my lord, and shall pray for your safety." They left the next morning with banners pulling taut against the wind. Stannis died. So did Renly, and the singers were given many songs that day. The beautiful third son, clad in armor, a gleaming silver, the sour second one, given over to madness and prophecy. Their battle over right and might and inheritance and blood, the fall of steel. The truth of that day was something less romantic. Renly laid siege to Dragonstone months previously. On the edge of starvation for the second time in his life, Stannis asked for a parley. The terms he offered were to spare Renly's death, were he to bend the knee, and Renly refused. Stannis returned to Dragonstone and the siege continued. The next morning, Stannis led a last charge to break the back of Renly's army, and during the battle, a shadow, black and creeping and ugly, struck Renly from the back. Stannis must have thought to use the confusion as his ally. But the Knight of Flowers rallied the men with a loud cry and drove back Stannis' men, his tired, half-starved men, with ease. Lady Brienne of Tarth struck Stannis' head from his shoulders. The Tyrells fled back to Highgarden with Margaery and Loras, but not before rebuilding the Sept, exiling all the followers of the Lord of Light that would not convert back to the faith of the Seven, and killing the priestess Melisandre, who claimed responsibility for the shadow that killed Renly. Princess Shireen, the last of the true-born Baratheons, was placed under the strict supervision of certain Storm Lords and taken to Storm's End. Songs told of a knight's valor, of a brother's rage, of a woman's seduction. But here's the truth, plain and ugly: that terrible day there was only death. Sansa took a long, leisurely walk through the courtyard, lady beside her. Lyra and Jarell Mormont were sparring only a few yards away, and several other women were walking as well. With the keep empty of men, more women than ever seemed to enjoy the sunlight on their faces. A place of peace, she thought. A place where we need not fear. 'Tis a blessing, for however long it lasts. And as soon as she thought it, Riskin burst out from a shadow, riding a shaggy dog and whooping. Women scattered before him, shrieking, and Sansa felt the laugh bubble through her chest. It took her a full hour to get him off Shaggy Dog. It took Lady snarling him into submission, in point of fact, and though he pouted when she made him wash his hands, he was soon giggling madly as Sansa, in an attempt to get him to eat his dinner, soon had more food on her skirts than in his mouth. Finally taking pity on Sansa's increasingly despairing expression, Adara and Alice descended on him and sent her to clean up. Sansa had just changed into a new gown and was walking through the courtyard again, this time in an attempt to clear her head, when a rhythmic sound came from the gates, and Sansa turned to look. Arya burst into the courtyard, clinging to Nymeria's back, and slipped off before the direwolf had stopped. Lyra and Jarell, still sparring, stopped and drifted over, curiously. "Lannisters," gasped Arya. Her cheeks were red and chapped with wind. Sansa frowned. Arya had gone for rides into the plains surrounding the keep every morning, and Sansa had never said a word against it. Arya could keep herself safe, after all. But now, Lannisters? Arya nodded frantically. More than 100, marching from the river. More than 100. Not by much. She dug her hands into her breeches and doubled over, panting before getting up slowly. They're wearing Northwear. I'd not have thought them out of place if I hadn't seen the Kingslayer. You're sure, Arya? Sansa asked sharply. Yes, she snapped. I know what I saw. I'm sure of it. There's a Lannister force of about 100 men riding to this bloody keep, and if we don't do anything, we'll die where we stand. Jarrell started forward. How far are they, Princess? A few hours. They'll be here before sundown, at the latest. Drop the titles, Sansa said flatly. Arya and Jarrell looked at her, startled. She only looked up, judging the position of the sun. We've more important things to do than identify which title we have, and time is of the essence. An afternoon, at the most, if they were lucky. Gods, what a time to have only women and children here. Get me Alice, Willa, Winifred, Adara, Mira, and have them assemble in the Solar. And you, Jarrell, and Lyra. Sansa turned to Arya. Have some women go and gather herbs and berries and all the things they can from the forest nearby, she told her. Take Lady and Nymeria with you, and bring them back before sundown, do you hear? Yes, Arya replied, and turned to walk away. There, she hesitated for a brief moment. Sansa. I know, Sansa said, and she did. Neither of them would ever dream of telling Robb or Jon, but they'd been terrified when the Lannisters rode north. There was no news, not for almost a full week, and Father had locked the gates and told them that if the bone horn set outside the keep was to blow, they had to run and hide. Every night, Sansa had dragged Arya into her rooms and they'd lain together, just as angry as they were frightened. But there, they'd had Father beside them. They'd had Roderick Castle and his trained guards. They'd had Robb. Now they had themselves and not a single other person who could save them. We will have to be enough, Sansa thought, and stepped forward to press a cold palm to Arya's for just a heartbeat. Be safe, she whispered, and then walked back into the keep. In Lord Umber's Solar, Sansa entered into a storm of shouting. Adara had lost all her reserve, it seemed, for she was gesturing so wildly that everyone was giving her a meter berth. Willa shouted back, shoving at her sister when Winifred snapped something. Alice whirled on Willa and might very well have gone after her with her bare hands had Sansa not brought the flat of her palms down on the table. The crack reverberated through the room, silencing it. A force of 100 Lannisters rides to Last Hearth, Sansa said into the silence. We have no men and over 500 women and children to protect. If we fight amongst ourselves, how can we hope to survive? Slowly, awkwardly, the women gathered around the table. Sansa ignored their hesitance. There was no time for patience, not now. We must first send word, Willa said finally. To our fathers, or to Winterfell, at the least. I'll send a raven within the hour, Sansa agreed. The Lannisters will shoot it down. Lyra shifted uneasily. It's what any battle commander would do. You don't want your enemy sending out calls for aid. We'll try, of course, but we can't trust that it'll reach. Adara nodded. And what of the men? We have to tell them what's going on as well. Aye, they can try to break the Lannisters against these walls. It's not going to work. They're unarmed, and have you seen the geography? The Lannisters can hold the entire valley with only 50 men. Surprise can't answer for the rest of the disadvantages. So what, we sit here and starve while the Lannisters parade outside? We aren't even sure they are Lannisters. We do both at the same time, Sansa announced, and the others fell silent. She was a princess, and everyone there knew it. Sansa had to lead. Lyra, Jarrell, amongst the two of you, who's the better rider? They looked at each other, measuring. I am, Lyra said finally. And who's the better at wielding a sword? I am, Lyra repeated. Sansa's head jerked in a decisive nod. Then you'll ride out within the hour to the Wolfswood, find the men, and lead them south to Winterfell. When they all protested, a rising tide of sound against leaving themselves helpless, Sansa held up a hand. Alice is correct. Surprise cannot answer for everything else our men will face. If they attack the Lannisters, at best, they will be taken as hostages. At worst, they will die. No one answered that. Finally, Willa looked up, meeting Sansa's eyes steadily. It's a good idea, she said. But don't lead those men only to Winterfell, Lyra. Tell them to go to each of the major houses and spread the word. Slowly, Alice nodded. If the Lannisters take the castle, they'll hold the entire north by the throat. All the women of the high houses will control us. They'll control the north. Another way for the north to fall. Gods, I did this. They won't, Sansa heard herself say, as if from a great distance. The others looked at her, startled, and she pushed her chair back. She rose to her feet. We will hold Last Hearth, until we breathe our last. This is the North, not any gold-veined Lannister keep. We are the daughters of each of the noble houses of the North, and we will not kneel to an honorless kingslayer quietly. She breathed in sharply and averted her face, searching for some measure of control. Finally, she nodded to Lyra. Go, she ordered. Get ready. We'll meet you at the gates. Lyra left, and then Mira asked dryly, And what should we do, Princess Sansa? Drop the title, Sansa said. We have to work together, or we won't be able to do anything. Right now, it is the 6 of you and Arya who are my council of war. So what do you think you should do? Well, we could put some people in charge of different things, Alice said. Like food, water, clothes. Different women for different things. Like who? Alina Glenmore has a good head on her shoulders, Jarrell commented. Idara folded her hands neatly on the table. The Forrester girls should be good at managing the clothes. And Bethany Blackwood's young, but her father's taught her to maintain horses fairly well. Gwyn Whitehill? Alice asked. She could help Alina. Sansa felt a smile twitch her lips. Idara and Alice, you'll set it up then? Everything but food, I think. You'll be the go-betweens for the rest of the women and us, if that's all right with you. We shall do our best, Idara murmured. And the rest of you, Sansa said, sweeping a hand between them, just keep the peace. Keep the women calm, tell them we'll survive. Make sure they don't panic. Good advice, Jarrell said sardonically. We are children fighting a war, but we've 500 women here, dependent on our bravery. We cannot afford mistakes. Come, she said calmly. We must gather in the courtyard. Stay alive, Sansa told Lyra quietly. Stay safe, and stay alive. Keep your head down and your chin up and whisper the truth as loudly as you dare. But live, Lyra, please, before everything else. I would not wish the pain of a sister's death on anyone. You're a good leader, Lyra replied and swung onto the horse. You'll keep them safe. I'm glad Jory and Lyanna have you here to protect them. Now you keep them safe, you hear? Mother'll kill me if she finds out anything happened to them. One elder sister to another, Sansa said, and clasped Lyra's hands in her own, a promise as steady as she could make it. I'll do my best. Aye, you will. And I don't think anyone can stop you when you do your best, can they? She winked, and with that last, confusing comment, Lyra left. Jaime Lannister's men came into view almost before Arya had finished leading the women back. It was Lyanna Mormont who chivied the last of them, and despite the bleakness of the situation, Sansa felt amused at the cowed looks of women likely thrice the girl's age. Close the gates, she ordered, and it was done quickly. Sansa waited grimly as they rode closer. The bulk of the men stopped and circled a point perhaps a half-mile from the walls. A pale-haired youth rode forward after some uncertain milling and paused at the gates. We've come to ask for shelter, he called up to her. Have you? Sansa asked back. Tell me, since when did Jaime Lannister become a Northerner? The boy paused, taken aback, and Sansa pressed onwards. Tell the Kingslayer that I wish to speak to him. Mera made an abortive sound, but she ignored her. And tell him that I will only leave these walls when he has the guts to fly Lannister banners. I refuse to walk into an enemy camp painted with Stark direwolves. The boy turned and left. An hour later, the white banners were taken down and red ones flew. Sansa took it as a sign of acceptance of her terms, and readied herself to leave. I'm coming, Arya said. Sansa shook her head. If they don't honor the peace terms, you'll have to hold the castle. I'm not delivering both Stark princesses to the Kingslayer on a silver platter. Just yourself, said Mira. And Alice, agreed Sansa. We'll go, and we'll come back. But you'll hold this castle no matter what happens, do you understand? No matter what happens to me, or to Alice. You'll come back, Arya snapped, or I'll take your head myself. Sansa smiled thinly and embraced her. Stay safe, she whispered, and then pulled herself onto the horse. An afterthought, she added, and keep Rickon safe too, Arya. Of course, Arya said. And you too. Keep safe. Of course, Sansa echoed, and she and Alice left. Jaime watched two specks steadily get bigger. Upon closer inspection, the specks were two women, and one had that damn tele hair. That had to be Sansa Stark, then purportedly a princess, and a gracious one at that, according to the small folk. According to Cersei, she was a fool and a pawn that had as much air in her brain as color in her hair. Beside her, he frowned, and then looked to his left, a silent question hanging in the air. Alice Karstark, said Ramsay Snow, who had provided uniforms that gave them some measure. Sansa realized that her hands were shaking when she landed in the courtyard. 1,000 faces were looking back at her, pale ovals sketched with fear and shaded with grief, and all Sansa could feel at that moment was sheer fury. There is no peace, she announced, and there was a near-silent murmur of confusion laced with panic at it. The council shall meet in 10 minutes, Sansa added, and then stalked into the keep. We knew we had nothing to negotiate with, Sansa began tiredly, once everyone had settled into their seats. It was just a stalling technique, in all truth, the parley. But the Kingslayer did offer us some terms that aren't as horrendous as expected. He says that he won't touch us, Alice said tonelessly. If we open the gates tonight, that is. Adara stared at the grain of the table. Are those terms so bad? They're the best we'll get, said Willa. If we stall? Winifred began. For what purpose? Arya asked derisively. To make them angrier? To have them take back the terms that they've already given? For an army, Winifred countered heatedly. Sansa shook her head minutely and held up a hand before Arya could retort. We cannot stand still and let them enter. So we won't. No, she said. There's no army coming. The car holds closest, and even then it'll take a fortnight for a single rider. An army will take even longer. The Dreadfort's closer, I know, but they've turned their allegiance. We can't depend on them. And the food stores are enough for only 3 weeks. With two things we can do right now. We can open the gates and allow them in. Whether we do it now or in 3 weeks, it matters little. She straightened and looked each woman in the eye. Or we can fight. Fight? Will asked. With what men? We have 500 women, Sansa said, and it was level. It was as straight-edged, cutting as a sword's blade. We have horses. We have the largest amount of steel in the north, according to Moore's Umber. I know that it is easy to bow our heads and bend the knee and look away, but I tell you this, we Starks don't turn our faces. The men of the north are honorable, and we are their daughters, their sisters, their soon-to-be wives. Tell me why we can't lift steel in our own defense. None of us know how, said Winifred. It's not that difficult, Arya replied. Think of it as a pointy stick, and you've got more experience than most women already. Sansa struggled not to roll her eyes. Then she breathed deep and said quietly, I'm not going to ask you to fight if you don't want to. If enough of you want to, more than half, we'll open the gates and let them in. I'll do it. But I think we can. I think it's possible. I think there's something that we can achieve, something great, right here. But it's only possible if we're brave enough to reach out and take it. Arya frowned, looking over her with glittering eyes. Abruptly, she jerked her chair back and rose to her feet. I say we fight, she said. Adara got up slowly. We can't, she said. 100 trained men against us? We're girls, all of us. We can't. Open the gates. I say we fight, said Willa fiercely as she stood. We Manderleys have flown Stark banners for 1,000 years. We won't falter here. Gerald nodded. If we open the gates, we're nothing more than glorified prisoners, no matter how safe the Lannisters claim we'll be. No, I say we fight. To what end? Winifred asked softly. We risk everything that we have in the hopes that we can train women to bear steel? Open the gates. Willa looked stunned at Winifred's words. She turned a dark pink that clashed horrendously with her green hair. Before she could shout, though, Mira rose to her feet. I can teach them to defend themselves, she said. And we're strong, each of us, in our own ways. I will fight, I say, and will fight well. They waited for Alice to speak. She was the last, but she didn't. She only stared at the table for a long time before slowly looking up at Sansa. Had you not spoken, the bastard would have taken us prisoner, she said. And who knows what would have happened then? The Kingslayer didn't expect you. Alice looked around her, and her lips twitched. You should have seen it, she told the others. She was wonderful. She was as courteous as a blade, and nearly made the Kingslayer bleed with it. Her eyes swung back to Sansa. He thought you a shrinking southern violet. He still thinks all of us as foolish and meek as his sister and her ladies. But we're northerners, born and bred, and that blood runs true. For 16 years, everyone's told me to stay silent, to watch and wait, to be nothing more than a warm body for some strange man once I've flowered. Not a one's told me to stand up for myself. Alice nodded once decisively. Put a sword in my hands, princess, and I'll help lead the army myself. 7 women ranged in front of her, each as different from the other as possible. But they stood, and they stood tall, and Sansa could do nothing more than match that courage. She rose to her feet. Then we fight, she said. We shall fight, and we shall do our inheritance justice. She pressed against the table, both palms flat against the rough wooden grain. Get some rest. We begin training on the morrow. Lyra's horse dropped when she was just out of the wolfswood. She belted her sword to her waist, patted it on the neck, tugged her hood tighter, and began to run. 2 days later, she stepped into Winterfell's courtyard. It took her a few moments to enter the keep, and then she was in the great hall. A man was at the head table, and she could see Arya in the lines of his face. Lord Stark. I've arrived. Swiftly, she moved forward, approaching the table. When she was only a few feet away, she stepped out of the shadows and threw back her hood. She unsheathed her sword, ignoring the sudden hush at bared steel in the great hall, and knelt. When she looked up, Lord Stark was frowning heavily. There was no recognition in his face. My name is Lyra Mormont, she said hoarsely. I am the daughter of Lady Maege, sister to Daisy, and your daughters have sent me here, my lord. He got up. My daughters? They are at last hearth, Lady Lyra. They are. There is news, she said. News I would tell you first, my lord, before telling others. I beg of you, do you have a council that you must call? I'd rather tell it to all whom I must once. Aye, he said, and Lyra let herself be led to a small room a few corridors away. When all the lords were assembled, he said, "Tell us, Lady Lara, what news from last hearth?" "A force of Lannisters," she said. 100 men led by the Kingslayer march on the keep. Princess Arya was out riding when she saw them, and so returned and told us what she saw. "Impossible!" a lord said. "You think villagers wouldn't have spread rumors of their march?" "And even if that wasn't true, the keep will hold." 200 men stayed there as protection, said another. Lyra firmed her jaw. Her princesses, her sisters, her friends, they depended on her surety. They depended on her to save them. "They wore northern armor," she explained stiffly, "and the men were out hunting. The keep held only women and children when the Lannisters came." "How are Sansa and Arya?" Lord Stark asked, eyes cold enough to make Lyra shiver. "Alive," she replied. "As far as I know. As soon as Princess Arya rode in with the news, I left. I apologize, my lord, I know nothing more." "You rode south immediately?" "I found the men," Lyra said. "Those from the keep. Princess Sansa gave me letters pressed with her official seal, ordering them not to return. She recognized that the men were too few to retake the valley, and so told them not to lose their lives needlessly. Instead, she had them head to separate keeps and ask for assistance. But after that, yes, I rode south to Winterfell." One of them glared at her. "Where's your horse?" "I drove it too hard," she answered. Well, I hope it isn't dead, but we parted ways right before I left the Wolf's Wood." "And ran the rest of the way here?" "Yes," she snapped. "I ran for 2 days and 3 nights, and right now I'm on my feet only because I've 2 sisters in that bloody castle that need me to save them. So listen to me and hear what I'm saying. There's a force of Lannisters at Last Hearth, and if your daughters aren't dead already, they are prisoners, and I'm not sure which fate is worse. Listen to me, you bloody overgrown fools. I'll get down on my knees if I have to. But do something, because I don't think I can bear to look at my mother and tell her where Jory and Lyanna are." "We are the women of the North," Sansa said in a hall packed with shaking, terrified people. "We are stars and bears and lizards and wolves. We are steel. We will not open the gates to the faithless Lannisters quietly. We will not bend the knee bloodlessly. We will not surrender. Our men carry steel at their waists and on their backs. Tell me, why can we not do the same?" "Do you think Bran's driven father crazy yet?" Robb asked. Jon smiled lazily. They were drunk, both of them, or not quite tipsy, perhaps. On the verge of becoming drunk, but not there yet. "If he hasn't, then Summer would've," he said. Robb laughed. "Imagine father telling that big white thing to heel like a hound." "Summer'll as easily listen to your father as he would to Bran," Jon told him. "But if Shaggy Dog were there..." "We'd return to a half-mad Lord of Winterfell," Robb finished. "Exactly." They settled into a nice silence, the ale blurring the lines of the tent into faint gold. It was broken by the Lady Catelyn, who looked between them disapprovingly but didn't say anything when she entered. She only handed Robb a letter and said, "It's from Winterfell." "Did you read it yet?" Robb asked. His tone was much different from before, an attempt to sound older than he actually was, Jon thought, but it didn't actually succeed. He looked slightly ridiculous when he puffed his chest out like that. "No," she said. "It just arrived." "What does it say?" Robb rolled his eyes and took the letter, unrolling it. A moment later, all levity faded from his face. By the time he was halfway through, his hands were trembling. When he finished, he was as white as a sheet. "Robb?" Jon asked slowly, a pit building in his gut. "What happened?" "Read," he said, tossing the letter to him. "Gods above, I did this. Jon bent over the letter. When he finished, he knew he wasn't much better than Robb. "They hold them," he whispered. "Aye," said Robb. Tears, bright and blinding, stood out in his eyes. "I'm leaving tonight," Jon said. "And doing what?" Robb asked. "You'll need an army to take Last Hearth. And you won't be able to, anyway. They have Arya. They have Rickon. They have Sansa." "What are you going to do, Jon?" "I'm going to start negotiating," Jon snapped back. "It's what we'll have to do, eventually, right?" Robb inhaled, exhaled, set his shoulders, and said no. Jon surged to his feet. It was a chair that saved Robb a broken nose, a chair between them, hampering his movements enough to allow some measure of calm into his head. And then Lady Catelyn stepped between them, eyes hard. "Don't be ridiculous, Robb," she said. "He has to go. If you want any sort of control over your army, you have to stay here. And Jon," she turned to him, "you'll go, but you won't go alone. Take 20 men with you. Use them as negotiation pieces, if you must. I'm sure there are enough young men here, enough men whose sisters and daughters are there and that keep they'll want to accompany you." "I don't want 20 men." "You'll take them," Robb said suddenly. "And you'll go north, and you'll do your best, do you understand?" Jon felt cold, bitter bile rise down his throat. "I'll save them," he said roughly. "I'll try, God's above. I love them too, Robb." "I know that." He sighed and looked grief-stricken, looked exhausted, looked young. "I know that, Jon. But I'm the one who removed them from Winterfell's safety. I caused this, and I don't know if I could bear their deaths. My sisters! My youngest brother! In the gods be damned Kingslayer's hands." "You didn't cause this," Lady Catelyn said at the same time as Jon's. "This isn't your fault." "I'll find those who betrayed us, and I'll kill them myself," Robb whispered, stepping around his mother and embracing Jon. "And you, find those Lannisters and kill them all. That's an order from your king, all right?" "Aye," said Jon, and pressed his forehead to Robb's shoulder, let himself dissolve into entire, body-shaking shudders. They didn't sleep. 3 weeks they had enough food for 3 weeks. Sansa was determined to make good use of it. The women, 500 of them, were divided into groups. All were given basic field dressing guidance. All were trained for at least a week on wielding swords taught by Arya or Mira. The children were given simple chores, and the older ones, led by Lyanna, helped in distributing the food and water and clothes. Sansa and her council didn't sleep. Arya and Mira were almost continuously training the women, and when they weren't, they were going over battle strategy with Sansa, Jarell, Alice, and Willa. Ediri and Winifred had taken over the healing sessions, and they all assisted each other where they could. Sansa read old historical records of wildling attacks on the castle and the strategies used to repel them. She dusted off tomes on geography to see if there were secret places that could be used. She yawned and stretched and snapped, and every step of the way, there were 7 other women beside her. As the days passed, they saw a battle plan emerge. It was pockmarked, scarred, shaky, but it was something, and it was built out of nothing but their own hard work. There was something to be proud of in it. "To the men I take," Jon announced, "I will not pause for you. Your horse toes a shoe, we leave you behind. You sleep late, we leave you behind. You whine at all, we tie you up and leave you behind. Do I make myself clear?" The men nodded. "Good," he said flatly. "We leave at dawn." Arya dragged Sansa out of the solar when 2 weeks had passed and Sansa had still not gone for a single training session. "I know you don't like swords," she told her, "but you'll be leading at least some women when we attack, and you'll need some knowledge. Plus, it's your own fault for convincing us to fight." "It isn't that," Sansa said, but Arya spoke over her. "Now we'll begin with how to hold a sword." "Give me one," Sansa interrupted. Arya sent her a look. It might look easy, Sansa, but it really isn't. You need to know how to hold one properly. I know, Sansa said. Now, give me a sword, Arya. She rolled her eyes and then picked up one from the pile at her feet, stepping forward and slapping it into Sansa's hand. Sansa hefted it easily. Wooden swords were weighted similarly to steel ones, but there was something inherently easier on the wrist with them. She raised an eyebrow at her sister. I might have told you that I know how to hold a sword if you'd asked, she said archly. I asked Rob to teach me a long time ago. No, I don't have your skill, because gods, it had been a long time since she last actually sparred or bore steel, but I am better than most anyone who doesn't have practice. Likely the only people who best me here are you, Jarrell, and Mira. Arya looked at her, evaluating, and then grinned. Come at me. What now? Yes, she said, raising her own practice sword. Now. It was a blur of gray stone and wood. Sansa met Arya's first two strikes and let her greater height bear down on Arya for a brief moment before seeing the flicker across the corner of her eye. She spun away, her sword coming up instinctively, but Arya wrapped her sword across Sansa's knuckles instead of the blade, and Sansa dropped her sword, nursing the stinging bruises. The clatter of the sword on the ground opened up her field of view, and Sansa became aware of the small crowd gathered around to watch their fight. You're not bad, said Arya, and while it wasn't admiring or anywhere near soft, it was warm, and it made Sansa grin back at her, suddenly unabashed, suddenly proud. We've got 5 more days of food, Jarrell said quietly. The Lannisters had spent 2 weeks drinking, carousing, and having the feast they knew those inside the keep couldn't afford. They could hear the music and rough laughter through the night. There should be rain soon, according to all the predictions. Sansa swallowed hard. And we're as ready as we'll get. As soon as the weather turns, we'll attack. Their plans were simple, as they needed to be. But first and foremost, it depended on Arya's bravery and her ability to sneak, and for that, she needed to look unremarkable. She needed to look like a boy. Sansa had hated to ask it of her, but Arya was fairly vibrating with excitement for this part. When Jarrell had offered to cut her hair, Sansa had insisted on doing it herself. Those who pass the judgment swing the sword. In this case, a knife. Arya's dark hair decorated the floor of her room. Sansa styled it to look as boyish as possible, all long, lanky strands that framed her pale, long face. When Arya slipped into a set of breeches and a jerkin, she looked remarkably unlike herself. Head down and chin up, Sansa told her firmly. Shaggy Dog and Nymeria are going to accompany you. We'll start riding out in an hour. Once you've taken care of the horses, you know what to do, don't you? Send Shaggy Dog back and hide, Arya recited. And then I know what I have to do after that. I'll take care of myself, don't worry, Sansa. You're the most important person here, Sansa said. We need you to do this. I wish I didn't have to ask my younger sister to kill people, but... When I told Jon that I'd killed a man, he told me that this isn't an easy world to live in. Arya scuffed a toe against the stone. But it's what we have, and nobody's going to be angry for defending ourselves. She breathed deep. I know you don't want me to do it, but I'm the best in this entire keep, so I'm going. Sansa hugged Arya tightly. I know, she whispered. I'm so afraid, Arya, and I'm so tired of being afraid, but I know you can do it. I never doubted it. You be safe too, Arya ordered, voice muffled into the weave of Sansa's gown. You have to do battle, Sansa, and you have to live. All right? You be safe. I'll try just as hard as you, Sansa said, leaning back and pressing a finger under Arya's chin, lifting it to meet her gaze. There was a promise, and a hope, and a fear, all melting together like dye in a tanner's workshop. Sansa, a month ago, might have wept at the tension. But now she had spent 3 weeks leading a castle of 500 people, inspiring and talking and fighting, Sansa was grimmer now, and older, and wiser. She only pressed her lips to Arya's forehead, as gently as she could. After a few moments, once Arya was putting the finishing touches on her costume, she spoke. "Did you talk to Rickon?" Sansa sighed. "Yes. He's not happy." The night before, he'd pitched a fit loud enough to be heard halfway across the keep, all because Sansa had finally told him that she and Arya would be attacking the Lannisters soon. It had only gotten worse when Sansa asked if he'd let Shaggy Dog go with him. He'd wanted to come with him. He'd refused to let them risk their lives and keep him safe. Arya had been the one to calm him down. Sansa wasn't sure what exactly Arya had told him, but he'd been subdued throughout the night. Even if he was sullen and moody when Sansa approached him, it was at least better than screaming and wearing at the nerves of the already jumpy population. "He'll be fine," Arya said and finished belting Needle at her waist. "He better be," Sansa said with a wan smile. "I can't handle him on top of everything else. Now, come on, we have to meet everyone else in the Solar." On the way, Arya grumbled, "I don't see the point of this meeting." "Think of it as a pep talk," Sansa replied. At Arya's scoff, she added, "You might not need one, but I'm sure there are some others that do." "I'm sure," Arya said dryly, and then they entered the Solar. The rest of the council was there when they arrived, all 6 other women. "Girls," Sansa thought, and felt prickling fear run down her spine. "We are just girls. Not a one of us has seen her 20th name day." "All of you know what we're going to do soon," Sansa said, taking her place at the head of the table. Arya flanked her. "Once we step out of this room, we are the leaders of this castle, the battle commanders. But we are not just that, and, well, I just want you to know, all of you, that if the Lannisters were to come like this, I'm glad that I'm fighting them beside you. There are none other that I would ask for." We couldn't have done this without each other." Jarrell smiled. "And I'll tell you this, Princess Sansa, none of us would be here without you." "We'd opened the gates and bent the knee to a Lannister bastard," said Willa. "Or we'd watched 200 of our own men get slaughtered for no reason. We've died, perhaps, or been raped. And we still might do all those things. I won't say it's impossible, but at least we didn't do it quietly. I can say I've pride in my choices, and that's not something I ever expected." Alice looked at Sansa intently. "If I am to die today, I'm glad it's beside all of you." She swallowed. "I am glad to do so in the name of the North, yes, but also in the name of Sansa Stark." "I'd wish all of you to live," Sansa said softly. "I'd want all of you beside me, not dead." "So would we," said Mira, a lopsided smirk affixed to her face. "But you asked us to fight, Princess, and we answered you. We'll fight to live, too, but we'll fight for you first. You chose to fight. Accept it, and let all those who underestimate you learn to regret it." "Thank you," Sansa said. "Thank you, all of you. I know this isn't what you wanted. We aren't fighting for anything other than life, and you know this. We aren't fighting for honor, not like our men. But it's what we have, and..." Arya's hand dug into Sansa's shoulder, squeezing hard enough to make her pause. "You're wrong," she said very seriously, under her brown-black fringe. "We do fight for honor, Sansa. Maybe not with honor, but for our own. And there's nothing lesser in that." Sansa looked at her little sister, younger by 2 years and so much older than her years suggested. "We are growing," she thought, and it was just as sad as when Robb accepted his crown. It was just as proud. "So we fight?" Sansa said, looking at each of them in turn, memorizing them as they were, all lamplit lovely. Any man might have only seen their beauty and named them empty-headed, but Sansa knew the way Alice narrowed her eyes when she concentrated, the way Willa dyed her hair green and honed her tongue like it was a sword, the way Winifred hid in her sister's shadow and used the darkness to take note of secrets, the way Jarrell bore steel with ease and hated using it every moment. The way Mira laughed at things others flinched at, and was still as kind as Winifred at her gentlest. The way Edira's hands tightened on each other when Nen on each other, when Nen on herself, when Nen near laughed, when Nen on each other, when Nen. If she'd never say anything, the way Arya bared her teeth and burned twice as bright as anyone else. If this is to be my only battle, she thought, I am proud to say I've fought it beside all of you. Thank you, she repeated and smiled as softly as she knew how, because Sansa was the courteous, genteel daughter of Lady Catelyn. And then, because that was not all she was, she added, Now, let's go out there and break an army, all right? When the valley turned misty with impending rain, Arya snuck out with Nymeria and Shaggy Dog. There were 3 sentries in the camp, and in the hours before dawn, she slit their throats quietly. The direwolves dragged their bodies away before they could be discovered. Nymeria returned quickly, but Shaggy Dog was gone to find the rest of the army. Then she went to the paddock, a temporary wooden enclosure the Lannisters had built to keep the horses together. A few well-placed torches, a nicely cut-down fence, and some judicious application of whistles ensured the horses stampeded towards the camp instead of away. The men were drunk or sleeping off the drink. They had no chance. Arya ran a slightly shaking hand down Nymeria's back and lowered her head, drew needle and moved towards the big red tent emblazoned with lions rampant. Your turn, Sansa, she thought. The geography surrounding the keep was, at first glance, highly undesirable, particularly in their situation. But they'd built a strategy that was as dependent upon that terrain as possible. The valley sloped upwards, ending in Lass Hearth itself. The reason why the Lannister men only covered one part of the valley was that there was nowhere to go in the opposite direction. It all emptied into the same basin in the end, anyway. But that meant there were separate entrances, not the main gates, which were closely watched, but smaller ones set into the sides. And these weren't watched half as closely because they all ended up in the same place. It was a waste of resources. These entrances were what they used. A major force, led by Sansa, Willa, and Mira, came through one. They were to await Shaggy Dog and then start marching. By the time they arrived at the camp, the released horses would have hopefully calmed enough. Their women could finish off those who hadn't been killed already. And a smaller force led by Jarell and Alice circled further around the valley, serving essentially as a sponge to absorb those who attempted to flee in that direction. When Shaggy Dog came loping out of the fog, all big and black, muzzle sticky with blood, Sansa thought she might be sick from the fear, from the anticipation. She breathed deep, drew her sword, and nodded to the 2 flanking her. We are Northerners, she thought, and started to move forward. Stay safe, thought Jon. Stay alive. I'm coming. For all their planning and preparation, though, Sansa had known one thing. It wouldn't be enough. If 40 men were injured in the horse stampede, they'd be lucky. If Jarell and Alice's force got another 20, they'd be lucky. And that still left more than 50 men to fight. And a force of 300 women was 6 times that of the men, but the men were trained. They'd done their best, attacked when they'd be drunk, sown confusion within their ranks, stoppered their escape, but it wasn't enough. They could only fight in pitched battle for so long before it became a death sentence. Sansa thought 15 minutes would be too much. Arya said 20, Jarell said 30. Whatever the number, the death toll was too high, and everyone accepted it. They needed something that could make 50 men drop their weapons quickly, unhesitatingly. Which was the second part of Arya's mission. The most important part of the entire battle, in all honesty. Sansa cut open a man's throat, feeling the warm splatter of blood across her face, and shoved another who was wounded in his leg right on the jagged cut. She looked around her, and when there was still no movement from the Lannister tents, she whistled for Shaggy Dog and sent him bounding towards the camp. She turned and met a blade with the flat of her own, just in time to avoid her neck being cut open. In the corner of her eye, she saw Willa scream and land on one knee, saw a Lannister soldier start forwards, ready to behead her, saw Lady pounce and take his throat between her jaws. Sansa bared her teeth, angled her sword, and moved forward. A moment later, Willa met her back with a flick of her green braid. "All right?" she asked when the rush slowed a little. "Yes," Willa replied. "Just a little mistake." She spun the sword in a wide arc, and Sansa fell back one step. She gave her room and slashed at a man who tried to take advantage of Willa's open side. "Be safe," Sansa said reprovingly, and then they separated. She wasn't sure how long it took, but slowly the rage of battle lessened, and she gasped in relief. The tide parted in front of her, and Sansa could see Arya standing before the men, a knife gleaming in her hand and Shaggy Dog beside her, Nymeria behind, limping slightly, front leg of vivid scarlet mess. Shaggy Dog beside her, jaws easily resting on Jaime Lannister's shoulder, ready to tear his throat out in an instant. Sansa felt relief spread, bone deep, in her chest, and she let herself step forward, take charge of the battlefield where they stood. "If you wish your leader to see sunrise," she said, "you'll drop your weapons." "Tell your men to surrender," Arya ordered the Kingslayer. He swallowed visibly. "I don't." "Surrender and we shall be merciful," Sansa spoke over him. If he ordered his men to fight, the consequences would be catastrophic. "Tell me, all of you, would one of you wish to go back to Tywin Lannister and tell him that your pride was responsible for his son's death? Drop your weapons right here, right now, and the Kingslayer will live." "Do it," Willa snapped out. But despite her commanding tone, her eyes were full of tension when she met Sansa's across the silent battlefield. Mira echoed her a moment later. "Kneel, now." And slowly, achingly slowly, the men knelt. It spread outwards like a wave of rippling grass, and Sansa did not let her shoulders bow a single bit, did not let herself relax one muscle while it happened. To her luck, too, hidden by all the bodies still standing, Ramsay Snow darted towards her. Perhaps it was because she was closest. Perhaps it was because of the 4 women standing on the field, she was the only one he'd spoken to. Or perhaps it was because in all the universes Ramsay deserved to die by Sansa's hand, and Sansa's alone. His sword cut into her shoulder before she knew he was there, and Sansa rolled away from the pain instinctively. A moment later, she had her sword up and pointed at him, and she was shaking from something approaching terror, another approaching pain. She heard Arya snap something, Mira shout, but they were too far. And Ramsay wouldn't stop for the Kingslayer as the other Lannister soldiers would, and if Sansa died there, the fragile peace constructed would be broken. They met and retreated twice more, and Sansa realized dimly that he was toying with her. He could have cut her down where she stood, if he'd wanted to. She was alive only because he was sadistic and vicious and wanted to make her death as drawn out and bloody as he could. Another moment and his mailed fist slammed into her chest, and she could hardly breathe. She could hardly see through the purple dots hazing her vision. If she gave up right there, nobody would know. Hair plastered to her head, rain falling all around them, Sansa felt her knees land in the mud. She closed her eyes, and the grip on her sword slacked a fraction, and just as she was about to let it fall, she heard, clear as if they stood right next to her. "You do not end here," said Jon. "You will not die in mud and guts," kneeling, said Robb. And in a voice that was as cold as the north and as loving as a mother's, Catelyn Stark said, "Get up, Sansa." Sansa got up, and though she felt scraped hollow, felt all she could do was fall, she kept to her feet. "Lady," she thought, and spun away from another attack. "Lady, I need you." The ground was getting slippery. The mist had risen, and the rain was heavier. Sansa gritted her teeth and gave way before Ramsay. And then Lady leapt forwards, a white blur, and tore Ramsay's sword hand off with one decisive bite. His scream echoed in the air for a brief moment before she bent over, wheezing, and then the only thing she heard was her own pants. Her chest ached, and she knew she had multiple wounds now that hadn't been there only moments before. The armor had taken Ramsay's fist to her chest, but the blow had distorted the steel, and she could not take a full breath without coughing. "You're alive." Sansa was alive, and she hadn't expected to be. She breathed deep and let that knowledge wash away the worst of the pain. She did not turn away when Lady began fully mauling Ramsay, and did not stop her either. Let the Lannisters see what awaited them if they didn't surrender. Let her people see what happened to bastard scum that dared to betray the North. Sansa didn't need anyone's help to get this little vengeance, and she was deeply, savagely proud of it. She straightened her back and stood as tall as her ladies in the solar, as Robb accepted a crown, as Jon swore to be her shield. "You will surrender," she said. Her voice was deeper, rasping against her bruises and aches. "You will surrender, or we will rip your throats out." The Lannisters gaped at her, and she didn't spare a single glance at the bloody corpse not 10 feet from her. Sansa didn't know what she looked like, but she did know that she was blood-drenched, aching, and draped in steel armor that glittered like a sword. She hoped she looked as wrathful as she felt. "Kneel," she snarled, and they obeyed. Jaime was in a state of numb shock. When his father told him to take 100 trustworthy men and ride north, Jaime thought him foolish. But then he heard of the letters exchanged between Roose Bolton and Tywin, forming an affirmation between the two, and it all became clear. So many noblewomen in one place, so far from any other garrison, with only 200 men to protect them. If they took the castle, the northern resistance would fail. The girls would either be wedded to Lannister soldiers that Jaime took with him, or used as hostages. The only difficult part, Jaime had thought, would be actually arriving there. The men could just as easily be starved inside the keep as not. But Roose Bolton sent his own son to guide them, and Ramsay Snow gave them uniforms to protect them from casual questions. He led them to the Dreadfort, and then they marched along the river to Last Hearth. They got there with only a few minor mishaps, and when they heard that the men were gone too, it seemed like a stroke of great luck. Jaime had been utterly confident in success. In another few weeks, depending on the state of the food reserves, the women would yield, and he'd be able to send out ravens telling the Northern Lords so. That first week, he'd been sure they were awaiting an army to save them, and he'd had the men on high alert, watching and wary, but nothing had happened. And slowly he'd come to accept that no, there was no one coming. The gates remained closed simply because of the girls' pride. The girls, for they were girls, the lot of them hadn't relented, and he'd become more and more impatient by the day. And then they attacked. Not at first, no. They released horses and stampeded them through the camp, killing and disorienting many of his men. Then they attacked with a force that was 6 times the number of his men, and before Jaime could properly identify what was going on, there was a thin scrap of a boy attacking him with a sword almost too thin to see, a boy with a great bloody wolf next to him. And when he thought he might finally be able to kill them both, another wolf jumped at him, quite literally choking him with his paws before the boy prized the sword from his hand and then dragged him upright. "My name is Arya Stark," the boy said, and Jaime was air-deprived. He could hardly see straight, much less recognize that this skinny urchin was Lord Stark's second daughter. "You will get up, Kingslayer, and if you so much as twitch in the wrong direction, I will have Shaggy Dog bite your head off. Now, move." At the battlefield, it was 4 girls who directed them to kneel, and after Princess Sansa killed Ramsay, gods, was that the fate that had awaited him had he not listened to the second Stark girl? He was dragged away, chained to a post, and guarded closely by the black direwolf. Another girl, with dark curls, drew a horn from her belt and blew it, and the sound that echoed was surprisingly loud for its size. She repeated it twice more. Slowly, gratingly, the gates opened. More women surged out of the keep, but these didn't seem to have the metallic armor of those who had come before. They knelt at each body they came across. Jaime felt his gorge rise at their steady, cold-blooded march. "You're monsters," he said through the dull ringing in his ear. The girl with the horn looked over at him. "You're the invaders," she pointed out, and it wasn't half as indignant as he'd expected. "We're not the ones killing all those who can't fight back," he exclaimed and yanked at his chains fruitlessly. The direwolf growled, and he subsided slowly, resentfully. "You think we're killing them?" the girl asked, amused. "Kingslayer, we're not evil, only desperate. And we're not killing those men. The women are trying to save those they can, and to those who have only a slow death before them, they're noting down their names and then offering them the chance of a painless death. We'll take as many of you as prisoners as we can." "Turning the tables on us," Jaime commented. And then, because she looked amenable to conversation, he added, "Tell me, who made the battle plans? Who won this battle? I'll cut his head off myself, like you northern savages seem to prefer. It takes some measure of courage to do something like this." "Princess Sansa. And all of us, I'd say." She grinned outright at the confusion on his face. "By all of us, I mean all 7 of us, the Princess's War Council. You've met Alice, I think, and of course you know Arya. But then there's Willa, Winifred, Adira, Jarell, and me. Don't you worry your pretty little head, Kingslayer, on the how. You didn't expect it, and that's the real reason you lost. You got victory by killing us while we slept. Where's the honor in that? Where's the honor in holding a castle of women and children hostage? Where's the honor in taking the aid of bastards and traitors?" She shrugged. "We aren't fools, Kingslayer. Just because we're young, well, your father made that same mistake, didn't he? King Rob's razing half your kingdom to the ground, and there's not a thing Tywin Lannister can do to stop him." Jaime stared at her, and then she turned and nodded to the urchin Stark who'd emerged out of the shadows as if a ghost. "Jarell's saying she needs you, Mira," she said. Mira, the girl with the horn, immediately nodded and headed away. Then Arya turned to look at him, and it was as dangerous as it was contemptuous. "You're a monster," she told him, and Jaime saw the red lines spanning her hands, the bandages wrapped around her neck, the blood still dripping from her pet direwolf's leg wound. He remembered the low, guttural cry she'd emitted when Ramsay Snow punched her sister in the chest, and Sansa didn't get up. He remembered the give of Jory Castle's skull under his sword, and her father's cry when he saw it, almost the same as her own. Yes, he thought, this love makes us all monsters. Sansa flinched only when Arya clapped her on the shoulder and then shouted loud enough to bring the attention of half the army. After the battle, Sansa dug her hands into work beside the other women who didn't need medical aid. She'd helped bandage the worst of the wounds, helped sew the larger cuts closed, helped hold down those whose limbs couldn't be saved and needed to be cut off. After she took her armor off, she found that she could breathe easily, and bruises were not something that were in their repertoire of healing, so she just gritted her teeth and bore through it. And then Arya tapped her shoulder to get her attention, and her hand came away a dark red, and Arya started to shout for help that simultaneously annoyed Sansa and frightened her half out of her wits. "I'm fine," she snapped, yanking her arm away. Arya just waved her hand under Sansa's nose. "Your shoulder's bleeding. I'm not sure which definition of fine you're using, but I'm pretty sure that it needs to fucking change. You're coming with me. I'm in the middle of an operation." "You're bleeding," Arya told her. "I don't care if you're treating with the Kingslayer, which, you're not. I had to do it, by the way, but you're not, right now, and I'm sure there's someone else around here that has stitches as straight as yours, so I don't care if you think I'm being annoying, you're coming with me." Sansa glared at her mutely and held her ground. Arya reached out and pressed, ungentle, against Sansa's shoulder. The world dissolved into blinding white noise. "See?" Arya asked, satisfied. "You're coming." Still nursing her shoulder, Sansa stumbled into a tent, only recently emptied, belonging to a Lannister soldier that was now either dead or in chains and waited. Arya came back a few moments later with Winifred in tow. "Stitch her shut," she ordered, and then strode out. Sansa sent Winifred a wan smile and winced at her reproving look. But Winifred said nothing as she approached. It was only when she poured the spirits over Sansa's cut that Sansa decided she could be just as heartless as Willa at her worst. A day later, Arya approached Sansa for the first time since she shoved her into a tent. "We need to send ravens," Arya said quietly. Sansa had washed the worst of the blood and grime from her face and hands, but her clothes were the same. The others had taken turns sleeping and recovering from the battle, but Sansa had only commented on everything that yet needed to be done, had only said she was the leader of the castle, had only said she was yet needed, and they'd accepted it. But here, in the dawn following a bloody battle, Sansa looked exhausted and miserable under her masks. "We can't," she said. "Why?" "Because if we send it to anyone and they tell the Boltons, we'll be damned." Sansa tipped to look over at Arya, all blue-eyed and steady. "Because there might be other bands roaming the countryside, and if they find out we have only an army of scarce 300 women to defend ourselves, we'll be verily damned." Arya arched an eyebrow, but before she could speak, Sansa continued. "No, I don't think it's terribly likely. But I do think it'll be another fortnight, minimum, before anyone comes close to us, and I don't think we can face another army, and I'd much rather wait and have a force of men beside us and full food stores before taking that chance." "So no ravens," Arya said glumly. "No," said Sansa. "No ravens? No communication at all. They left us to our fate, didn't they? They can wait for a fortnight." Arya looked at her sister and wondered when she'd changed so completely. "I like this new you," she told Sansa, and when her sister's expression didn't change a bit, Arya added, "And you need sleep." "I'll hold the castle, Sansa, don't worry, and I won't send any ravens either. You go, get some rest and change out of that damn dress. It's stinking like the seventh hell." "I hope Ramsay chokes on it," Sansa replied, and then with a grin and a wink left Arya on the battlements gaping at her disrespect. His men had sat on him. Jon, had he not had anyone beside him, would likely be at last hearth by now. But the 19 other men had decided that they didn't want to kill their horses by riding too hard, and that it made more sense to spend a night in an inn, take fresh horses, and then ride north once more. Jon hadn't expected them to lock him in his room. Not that the lock had stopped him per se, but it had slowed him down enough that the men had been able to take his horse and sell it. Before he could yell at them, they told him they'd give him another horse back in the morning. "We need rest," they said. "We'll be of more use if we have sleep and good food. We'll leave before sunrise tomorrow, we'll give you a fresh horse tomorrow, now sleep." But how could he sleep when Sansa was imprisoned in a keep of the Lannisters? When Arya was with her? When Rickon was with her? So Jon toured the small town, more a hamlet really, and as he paused at a tailor's little stall, the man next to him started talking to the tailor of a strange tale. "They're calling it the Battle of the Valkyries?" the man began excitedly. "Them Umberfolk, I mean. Say an army came through, all pretending to be Norwegians, and tried to burn a castle down and were going to win, and then another army came sweeping out of the mist and took them down." "Fucking bastard pretenders," the tailor said. The man grinned. "They say the army was led by a Valkyrie, you know, all red-haired and scary as those wildling raiders. The only banner they carried was her hair. She killed one of them traitors, and then her black-haired sister took their leader and right near slit his throat." "Is it true?" Jon asked. For some reason, his heart was pounding. For some reason, his chest ached, and there was a ringing sound in his ears. "Who knows?" the tailor asked. Then he nodded to the cloth. "Are you buying, boy? If not, I'm packing up and going home." "No," said Jon, and moved away. He doubled over as soon as he found an alley, and curled his forearms over his knees as he pressed his back against the rough stones of a wall. Deep breaths shuddered out of him, and the cool air was no balm against the heat in his cheeks. "I love you," he thought desperately. "I love you, and I would die for you, and it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to save you. It wasn't enough to protect you. I love you, and I am not enough, and I do not know how I can be." It felt like glass shards digging into his ribs, sinking into the fleshy part of his chest, breaking the bones and scraping his lungs. "I love you," he thought, and bit his tongue, and felt guilt rise in his throat along with the pain. Liara was a sharp girl. From her dark hair, as straight and sharp as any blade, to her mind, which was as cutting as any of her brothers who rode south for King Rob. They hadn't died yet, and the silence from the south for these past weeks had left Liara's belly aching at night. But she had 2 sisters to take care of in the keep, and if her belly ached at night, her chest burned something fierce when she bore that sword the princess put into her palms. And though the battle was over, Liara's wasn't. They'd been caught unawares when the Lannisters came, and Princess Sansa didn't want to face that again, so several volunteers were picked and now served as outriders for any kind of band. Liara didn't search for tracks in the woods. She rode into towns and markets and paid attention. It was hard, dangerous work. It was something she'd never seen herself doing. Liara's mother had wanted her to be a part of the Manderley household, and she'd gotten that for Liara. She'd wanted Liara to be a lady, and Liara had been flawless at it for 14 years. And now, she was a spy, and a scout, and a lady all rolled in one, and she'd never been prouder of herself. "You saw those men, though," murmured one girl as she exchanged coin for bread to the girl behind the counter. "Wasn't that leader handsome?" "He didn't even look around," the shop girl exclaimed. "But oh, his eyes, so handsome. I thought I could melt in them." "Didn't pay attention to that," said the first, waving a hand easily. "But his mouth looked pretty. And those shoulders, I think I died seeing them." "Aye, the gods threw you straight into the deepest hell," the shop girl said. "Brought you a man who's ruined you for all others, and you don't even know his name." "And blue-eyed Rez thinks I'm the dramatic one," the first said dryly, and finished bundling up her bread. When she was gone, Liara insinuated herself as inconspicuously as she could into the shop girl's field of view. "Listen," she said, once the rest of the customers had gone. Liara leaned against the counter, produced a silver stag between her fingers, and watched the girl's eyes gleam with greed. "I just want to talk to you about that man." Sansa's eyes felt as if full of grit. And then a lady rode into the keep, bent low over her horse and still hooded. Sansa drew back and her hand went instinctively to the pommel of her sword. But the lady only dropped her horse off to the stable hands that came forward, and then retreated into the keep. In the beginning, when a scout returned, there was a surge in tension. Now most of the women only barely registered it. Sansa, too, forgot it easily enough. At least until Idera knocked on the door to her solar, face stiff and controlled. "Am I disturbing?" she asked, nodding to the open ledgers. "Not at all," Sansa grimaced, scrubbing a hand down her face. "Just trying to maintain the food supplies. And we're running low on firewood, so we're going to need to go into the Wolf's Wood soon. I'd welcome a distraction, in all honesty." "Well, this isn't even bad news." Idara grinned, and it was startling on her usually reserved face. "Turns out there's a band of Northmen coming here. Soon." "What?" Sansa sat straight up, ledgers forgotten. "Who told you?" "The scout who came back this morning. She was down south and heard news of a group of men. After some asking around, she found out they weren't Lannisters or Boltons." "She's sure?" "You can talk to her?" Idara offered, but she sounded fair certain. Sansa ran a hand across the back of her neck and felt shivers run down her spine. Fear and excitement, a potent amalgamation, dripping like water down her back. "I will," she said. They rose and were halfway down the corridor when the warning bells rang. Sansa exchanged an alarmed look with Adira, picked up her skirts, and ran. The gates opened, grating against the stone, and Sansa felt impatience itch at her fingertips. Through it, slowly, she could see flashes of men, but not with the blonde hair of Lannisters, not with the bloody X of Boltons. There was only a single banner flying, she realized abruptly, and it had a pale direwolf sewn into it. And below, with an expression of such sheer, devastating hope written across his face, Jon awaited her. The gates were barely open when Jon darted forward. Later, Sansa thought that his intentions were mostly proper. She thought that he wanted solely to embrace her and then press a kiss to her cheek. She thought he wanted to keep them a secret for some more time. But that wasn't what happened. No. Jon raced towards her, and then Sansa was in his arms, and though she might have been able to control herself right there, when he turned his face to kiss her, she turned too, instinctively, and their lips met. And then there was nothing in Sansa of control or propriety, just an aching, all-consuming need.